welcome back. We're gonna get started for to me the real peak of the whole thing. Just like a dramatist should. I'll try to think of it this way, right? Have the rising action up to the climax, and then things kind of fall down with a denouement. I'd like to think of this as the climactic phase of our 2-day drama here, because we're really blessed to have to my immediate left Roger Allaway, who's was the official historian. I don't know what tense to use. Is the official historian?
Was.
Okay, of the National Soccer Hall of Fame, and of course to his immediate left, Jack Huckel, who was the director of Museum and Archive at the National Soccer Hall of Fame in Oneonta. I know for many of us, certainly for me, this weekend is kind of bittersweet. It was my third cousin who was the accountant there in Oneonta, so even in a family sense, the loss to that community there, and the opportunity that seemed to be there, and to see it go away, very painful, I think, for those of us who are from upstate New York, who still take pride. But again, there's also the sweetness of, okay, this has been revived, and really happy that at least it's not just going to be in boxes at Hillsborough moving forward. So with some cautious optimism, I think we're all trying to embrace this. But more than anything else, as we're talking about the Hall 2.0 and of course SASH 2.0, it's most important, I think, to draw upon the leadership, and also to thank those who really set the course for us. So as we move from this phase into the business phase of it, I'd really almost like that to be seamless. Before we talk about how we want SASH to move forward, we need to hear from the people who actually founded SASH and had such a great relationship with the Hall in Oneonta. And so with that, I want to just say thank you, Roger. Thank you, Jack, for being here. And maybe I'll just throw out the opening question. If you could just, well, I guess it's the monster question. Who got the ball rolling with SASH? Who kicked it off?
You want to talk? I'd say that Sam Foulds did. It was either Sam Foulds or Al Cologne, or maybe the both of them. The first organizational meeting of SASH. And Sam, let's see, Sam was 89 at that point, I believe. He knew that he was not going to last forever, and he knew that it was going to take more than one person to replace him. And he thought it was time for an organization. So, and Al agreed to help. But I'd say it was Sam more than any other one person.
I'd agree with that. It's Sam Foulds, who had been the historian for all living memory, I think, of anybody there, and it was Roger and I and Colin, really, that were there, sitting down with Sam. Al was the facilitator of the meeting, of the event.
I was still fairly peripherally involved up until that point.
I think we all
say that. When would you say that would have been?
was,
Obviously, the start date, the effective date, was January 1st, 1994. But how early was the ball really rolling towards SASH?
well, that meeting, you could look up the date of that meeting fairly easily, because it was the day after the United States played England in a friendly in Foxborough. I think the date of the game might have been June 9th. So the meeting would be June 10th. In any case, it could be looked up fairly easily. There were 19 people at that meeting, and I have tried to remember them, and I get stuck somewhere around halfway.
So is it just
minutes?
Al might have, I don't know.
Al might have. They might be buried somewhere.
So is it
in
just
those
a matter
areas.
of, surely there must have been some conversations before the game, though, happening of, hey, let's think of an organization, or was it really something
Well, I
that
think there
happened?
were certainly conversations between Sam and Al, but I don't know how many there were beyond that.
And the idea of the meeting was, as Roger said, organize, to attempt to create an organization for soccer history, an organization of people that were interested in the history of the game, had been active in documenting history to that point. And so that's who the call sort of went to. And I think that out of that meeting, and I would credit Al Colon with name of the organization. I think that's a fair. He created the name in the acronym, and but Sam was really the person who was mightily respected, and he was the person that brought us together because he knew of our interest in the history of the game.
Then for the first half year, before the formal start on January 1st, Al and I sort of ran it as a dictatorship. It was much easier than doing it democratically. But that meeting in June, that was when I came to that meeting with some ideas about what I thought it should be. And it was at that meeting that I decided I ought to, put my money where my mouth is. If I'm going to spout these ideas, I should get involved in doing things. So that's where I really started getting involved at that point.
And I came away from that meeting with the task of writing the Constitution and bylaws. So I based them on Sabre. Really stole literally and liberally from Sabre's document to draw one for us. I don't know if we ever effectively organized it that way, but it gave us a foundation. And of course it went through several edits of Roger and Colin and Al primarily. But it gave us a baseline from which to work as an organization.
I was the first president of it, but I don't remember when I actually was elected. I can't remember that.
Did you win the popular vote?
Electoral college. No, only the unpopular. And Jack was the secretary. Rick Fonseca from Los Angeles City College was the vice president. And I don't remember, John Biggs was the treasurer.
John Biggs was the treasurer, and Tom actually called me about this recently about nonprofit status, and we decided it was small enough we just run the finances through the Hall of Fame and never got the official nonprofit status document from the IRS. But that was John Biggs was chairman of the board of the National Soccer Hall of Fame at that time, and was the vice president of the bank.
I thought he was a mortgage officer, but I know he worked for a bank in Oneonta.
The Wilbur Bank in Oneonta. So that was the sort of the beginning organizational group.
So that speaks to the interconnectedness of SASH and the Hall in its formation, right?
Yeah.
So that literally the money was going through the Hall for any members. Obviously, that's the most material relationship that could possibly be. But can you tell us a bit both how SASH helped shape the Hall, and also how the Hall helped shape SASH at that time?
I remember a group of us sitting in a common room at Morris Hall at SUNY Oneonta, discussing people we thought ought to be in the hall. And then we wrote letters about these people to all, this state associations and got zero response.
And when Roger talks about that, you have to understand the process by which people were elected to the Hall of Fame in those days. The rules for election had been created by the Federation. And so you had to be nominated by a state association to get on the ballot. And then they were the people who voted primarily voted for who would be entered in the Hall of Fame. And that process, because I was also then with the National Soccer Coaches, I was their assistant historian, and Mickey Cochran had been a representative to that Hall of Fame process from the Coaches Association. And he passed that task along to me. So in those early days, I got to see the ballot, and I did get to vote. Those state associations, I think the proper word would be they were pretty provincial. So my example of that would be a player like Ricky Davis, originally from California, played with the Cosmos, played with, none of those state associations recognized him as their person, so he was never nominated to be on the ballot. None of them claimed him as, or were willing to expend. And of course, that's part of the reason that to that time, the hall was dominated by builders and by the builder category,
Yeah,
and administrators, because that's who the state associations put forward. The change happened, and here is the way SASH was really materially important. What happened was, before Hank left the Federation, Will Lund convinced them to turn over the responsibility for the election to the Hall of Fame. So that happened. And when that happened, it gave the Hall of Fame the responsibility to set the rules. And now Roger, Colin, and I, along with James Brown's father, George, who became a board member of the Hall of Fame and chair of their Honors and Awards Committee, now those original SASH members who were active with the Hall of Fame worked to determine a new set of rules, regulations around election to the Hall of Fame. And so that's a way that we had been working this project, and as Roger said, we tried to influence the project. Now we could create the election process and really be a formalized part of the Hall of Fame work.
We did have a bit of influence in '98, thanks to a man named Frank Longo, who was the head of the Veterans Committee, and I think he was the chief of staff at the USSF headquarters in Chicago. And he was the second year that we made this effort on behalf of these various people. We cut it down to just a few people,
Yes.
and targeted just a few organizations, and he responded positively. And as a result of his efforts, Ed Murphy got into the Hall of Fame in '98. But in general, the changeover in 1999 was huge.
Yep.
And the other night, when Taylor Twellman made his comments, and I agreed with most of what he said, but I wonder if he thinks it's bad now. He does know what bad really is. He talked about Steve Cherundolo, and I was disappointed that Cherundolo didn't get in this year or last year. But if we were still under that old system, Toronto would be 10 years away from even getting on the ballot yet. At the time that changeover took place in '99, the most recently retired player in the Hall of Fame was Johnny Moore, who had retired 18 years before. And an iconic person, an iconic figure in American soccer history, Walter Barr, didn't get in until 19 years after he retired.
Yeah.
So it was a very different world. And
recognize Frank was as Roger said, was with the Federation. He was an Illinois, Chicago person. Where did Ed Murphy play?
he was from Chicago.
He was from Chicago.
That's the issue.
So there was still that provincial piece of it.
That was always the issue, because,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah, Michael, you're.
I know it. I mean, you
Yes.
take a look at the Southern New York State,
Yep.
and I mean, I hate making this comment, but it was run by a certain group of people from Brooklyn, and you know, all of a sudden you got Lombardo, and you got all these other people, and you know, I would scratch my head and say, you know, good people, dedicated the whole 9 yards, but I just, you know, where's the meat?
Yes.
And but it just speaks to the provincial nature of it, because Southern New York State, I mean, I remember when Sunil would walk into the site, even now, he'll bring Rapalje in and all those other
Yep.
people just to, in the decision-making process. So the effect on the Hall of Fame nominees and those who got ahead, it was pretty obvious that it's whichever organization, as you mentioned, the gentleman from Illinois, look where the player came from. You know, that's how it worked. It was pretty clear.
What's interesting you say too in terms of Southern New York and Eastern New York, right? The way in which they do acknowledge their history on the website, but you know, people like Bagnall and Manly, they're not celebrated at all. Yeah, it is kind of self-serving.
There were a lot of associations that didn't get the message that the system had changed. And I remember in 2002, 2003, in there, I would look at letters when I went up to Oneonta, not suggesting various people for the Hall of Fame. And I remember particularly one from the Oklahoma State Association, which they started out by saying, we've decided that one of our own should be in the Hall of Fame. Out of all, by then we had a pretty good handle on who should be and who shouldn't be on the ballot.
Yep.
So reading those letters was not all that difficult a task, but
Writing the letter in response was
Yes.
diplomatic.
Uh,
Remind people of the criteria for that was an annual thing for me, was to remind people of the criteria, and whether, if you could provide documentation that said person meets the criteria, we'd be more than happy to place that person on the ballot for the year. Few of those came back with, here's how this person meets the criteria.
A few of those have in more recent years, and I am thinking of Scott here and Abner Wallen, who my information on him was incomplete, and Scott filled in some blanks for me, and he did meet the criteria. And ever since '99, I've been the person who's compiled the eligibility lists. And we missed Abner Wallen for a while, but thanks to Scott, he's on there